Hello again to all my classical humanities students. This is my third lecture on the Romans, and I just wanted to say as we start here, a little bit different this time, that this lecture will not be accompanied by questions in Google Classroom. Instead, it will be accompanied by an open notes Google form quiz. The reason for this change is that, you know, a lot of students watched the lectures last week, gave great responses to the Google questions in the classroom, but others didn't. They didn't watch it. They didn't partake in the questions. So I think we need to, despite this crisis, return to normality, which means that a lot of students are just grades orientated, and they need the incentive of those grades or not getting those grades to keep them on track, which is unfortunate, but that's the nature of life. I understand people are busy, and I thank those of you again who are motivated by a more general love of learning. But anyway, on we go here. I recommend opening that Google form quiz. I've tailored those questions to be easy as long as you watch the video. Otherwise, you're guessing. So yeah, I'll go ahead and do that now, and we will make a start. So we're going to talk today about Roman society, about Roman children, Roman education, the role of women in society, and slaves. So Roman children, what can we learn about ancient Rome and its children by studying their toys, numerous artifacts that are available? So we see here in the picture on the right, we have the picture of a charioteer. It is not a Roman soldier, it is a charioteer, showing that Roman children played with charioteers. They dreamed of becoming charioteers. Of course, they would not do so because charioteers were slaves. But children admired them. They saw their parents go to the games, go to the Circus Maximus. They would accompany them sometimes. And they would see these brave charioteers and they would aspire to be like them. Similarly, we also have toys made out of gladiators. And again, looked up to. Many gladiators became very famous, those that survived long enough to do so. So this was the case. They were very much looked up to in the same way that children today would like to be basketball players or soccer players and so forth. We also see that the Romans played dice, they gambled, and had board games. The board game here on the top right is an ancient form of chess known as La Trompula. And this could be found, these games were even found in as far-flung places as Britain. Right, so that's Roman games, telling us about what they aspired to. Now, education was very important for the Romans, um, and it was open to patricians, that's the wealthy, and the plebeians, to elementary school, the ludus for both boys and girls. So there was a wide access there at the elementary school level. What did they study? Well, they studied math, reading, writing, poetry, and geometry. Geometry, very important to the Romans, like the Egyptians, engineers, great builders, the Romans. So geometry is of great importance to them. Now, the teachers often were Roman citizens, but they were also often Greeks, Greek slaves being brought back to Rome. Uh, this shows us there's a paradox here. You might say to enslave someone is to show disrespect. However, the Romans, by entrusting the education of their children to Greek slaves, shows once again, in fact, that the Romans honored the Greeks. They looked up to the Greeks. They saw them as the height of civilization, of civilized society. And that was the case. Discipline could be severe in Roman schools. They would certainly introduce physical punishment into proceedings if necessary. So you might have the strange situation in which a, a slave could, with the permission of the nobility, could actually discipline and whip a patrician child. Of course, this had to be paid for. It was not public education as we know it, and therefore plebeians didn't always go to school because, of course, they had to have the money to do so. Now, The object here that you see on this particular slide is a wax tablet. Romans used wax tablets. The children would use a pen called a stylus to inscribe in the wax tablet, which could be wiped clean so it could be used again. A kind of advancement on the Egyptian and Greek habit of writing on pieces of broken pottery, and of course, also superior to the Mesopotamian method of cuneiform because it could be reused. So, yes, the wax tablet, like a kind of modern day etch a sketch, you could use it, wipe it clean, and go again. Very good. Now, higher education in Rome was limited to the sons of the patricians, and two subjects in particular that they focused on were oratory and rhetoric. Oratory is the art of public speaking, rhetoric is the skill of argumentation. Argumentation. Now, these were very important because the sons of patricians would aspire to reach high political positions in Rome, positions such as the aedileship, the praetorship, and all the way up to, of course, the position of consul. And so to be a politician in Rome meant to be an accomplished speaker. This was highly prized. Also, the ability to argue and to create a legal case was also highly valued. And we will have an assignment on this, an activity on this. I'm going to make one for sixth period, so watch out for that. Moving on then to the homes of the Romans. The very great difference between the homes of the wealthy and the poor. We can contrast them in the following images. We have here on the first page the homes of the plebeians. This block of apartments, the building were known as insulae. Insulae. So we've cramped apartments made out of wood, basic accommodation. For example, in these one-roomed flats, that you could not cook food. It was too dangerous. Too many fires broke out in Rome, so they were no longer allowed. And so the plebeians could only prepare cold foods in their homes. If they wanted a hot meal, they would go to a stand-up fast food type restaurant called a thermopylae. This is contrasted with the patricians, the noble elite who had luxurious homes in which they were attended to by vast numbers of slaves. We have beautiful features here, and there's all sorts of Roman names for these different rooms. I won't bother you with all those names now, but we have rooms such as the peristylum, the triclinium, and so forth. Beautiful courtyards with water features, places to relax, open air, of course, because of the warm Mediterranean climate. So great differences between the wealthy and the ordinary citizens of Rome. Now, mosaics were common in the homes of the wealthy. Beautiful tiled mosaics, elaborate, and they also serve to tell us about some of the features of the Romans, artifacts, physical reminders of the life of the Romans. So, for example, we have here at the top left a dog, which was accompanied by a sign, Cav Canem, meaning beware of the dog. Quite simply, the Roman patricians would use guard dogs to guard their homes. On the right, we have a giraffe, which is, of course, exotic animal, showing off the wealth of the patricians, that these were people who could engage in follies such as the importation of animals from the far reaches of the empire. On the bottom left, we have here a beautiful mosaic of Poseidon. We have here the Roman god of the sea, showing us that yes, the Romans had wealth, yes, they had luxury, yes, they could bring in foreign animals from far afield, but they were also a devout people. and honoring the gods was important to them. And at the heart of the Roman home, we had the Vesta. That is the little hearth, Hestia, the heart of the Roman home, and honoring the goddess. Let's move on. Roman diet. Patricians had great feasts, attended to again by slaves who would come to them to attend to them. Meals would go on for hours. We have here, there is the legend of the vomitorium. And now, when I was back in what we call primary school back in Ireland, we were told that the patricians would gorge themselves on food, at which point a vomitorium would be wheeled out. It would be a bowl within a moving vehicle as such, and taken out and then vomited into. But historians have now said that might not have been the case, that this was a misinterpretation of another object in the home. So they're not so sure that this actually happened. As I mentioned earlier, the plebeians did not get to engage in all these festivities and could not even prepare food in their own homes. Now, we have a link here to a research page, a considerable research page on Roman women. A list of questions here, which you should look at. So you guys can go ahead and click on that, look at the questions I have here, read through them, consider them. In particular, then there's two questions in the Google form open notes quiz, which asks you to consider how it was that Romans had rights. Where do they come in this comparison of the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman women? Well, what we can say is that Roman women had more power, more freedom than Greek women. Clearly so. Perhaps not quite as much as Egyptian women, and there are limitations. There are not always treated equally. You'll be able to see this particularly in cases, for example, involving adultery. We see that Roman women suffer far more serious punishments, but that they do have more freedom than Greek women, and a whole list of occupations that women could engage in Rome. So make sure to check that out. Here's the link. Have a look at that. You see it here. We have readings about what was expected of patrician wives, the daily life of aristocratic women, and also the world of work for plebeians. Okay, so back to our slideshow, and then we can also talk about. You will read more on this. About the ability of women to divorce and retain property rights and so forth. So check all of that out, please, in that link for Roman women. Now, the last topic I want to talk about there is slaves, slavery. So the position of slaves. Why was it that the Romans had so many slaves? At the peak of the Roman Empire, it is estimated that the Romans, the population of the city of Rome, the first mega city in the world, being the first city with a population in excess of 1 million, that Rome constituted 40% of the population being slaves. How was that? Why was that? Well, quite simply, it is because they had the most enduring empire, and once they won battles, they would bring back slaves, and they had the capability, the ability to bring slaves back. Not every group did. The Romans did not win every battle. They lost battles as well as winning them, but their enemies often didn't have the capability to enslave Romans, the infrastructure to do that, social, physical infrastructure to do that. Who benefited from all these slaves? Was it equally benefiting? Well, the answer is no, absolutely not. It was the patricians, the wealthy patricians, who were able to buy slaves and then use that slave labor to bring in harvests, to plant crops, to beautify their homes, or to mine and to do hard work for them and to further enrich themselves and then further distance themselves from the ordinary people of Rome, the plebeians. So this brought a number of dangers, societal dangers. One of them being that it opened up a very significant gap between the plebeians, the regular people of Rome, and the wealthy patricians. Because with slave labor at hand, this drove down the value, the wages that a plebeian Roman could expect, and therefore it actually impoverished poor Romans and made it less likely they could buy land, certainly anywhere in and around Rome, and led to great resentment and tension. Uh, a factor that many believe in the long term weakened Rome and contributed to its downfall. Now, slaves could become freedmen, unlike in, let's say, the modern American slavery system. Roman slaves could become freedmen. It was not determined that a slave was inferior by virtue of their race, their ethnicity, religion. It was just that they had lost in battle. So therefore, there was avenues open to them to become free. And sometimes slaves, if they were particularly hardworking, they could be rewarded monetarily with low wages. And over time, through the worth of their service or by accumulation of this small pay, could buy their freedom, which was called manumission. Manumission. Now, of course, if you have very large numbers of slaves, you're eventually going to get problems. And in the late era of the Roman Republic, before it became switched over to becoming an actual empire that is ruled by one man emperors, there was a series of slave uprisings, um, two of which were on the island of Sicily, leading to wars called the Servile Wars. The most famous of these rebellions was led by a man called Spartacus. Spartacus was an escaped gladiator. He led a slave uprising and an army which terrorized the Roman provinces, even defeating several legions sent to defeat him. So that's an incredible thing. Twice, Spartacus and his army of liberated gladiators and other slaves defeated legions, escaping to the north of Italy. But twice, Spartacus turned this army around and went back down into the Roman mainland again. Why did he do this? Why would Spartacus do such a thing? And the reason was that really his slave army did not know where to go. It was composed of people strung out from across the empire. They had no determined homeland, no place to go. So all they really knew to do was to keep fighting. And eventually they were defeated. They were defeated by the wealthiest man in Rome, the Bill Gates of Rome, if you will, or the Jeff Bezos, Marcus Aurelius Crassus. Crassus paid for a very large army to be raised. He promised to crush the rebellion. He did so and infamously punished Spartacus and his fellow slaves by decorating, if you will, the Appian Way, the road to Rome, with a miles and miles of dead slaves hung up on crucifixes. So, a very grisly end for Spartacus and co. Again, showing us this combination of the Romans for both sophistication and also terrible cruelty. Um, thank you. Make sure to look at the Open Notes reading quiz and complete that.